First, let's start with this case. I, 29 male, have a younger sister, Carla, 25 female, who's been living in my apartment for the past 3 years. It started when she came to me, saying she was struggling to pay her rent because of her job situation. At that point, I wasn't in a bad financial position, and I felt like it would be okay to let her stay with me for a while. I told her she could stay with me rent-free, and I'd help her get back on her feet. Fast forward 3 years. She's still living with me, and it hasn't changed. She still doesn't pay any rent, doesn't help with utilities, and doesn't even do her fair share of the housework. It's honestly been a lot to deal with. I didn't mind at first because I genuinely wanted to help her, but I've started feeling like she's taking advantage of my generosity. Last month, I told her I wasn't going to cover her rent anymore. I told her she either needed to get a full-time job that would allow her to support herself, or she could move out. I've always been the kind of person who believes in tough love when necessary. I wasn't asking for much, just for her to take responsibility for herself. She immediately started making excuses. She told me that the job market was hard, that she had applied to so many places and no one was hiring, and that the rent was way too expensive for someone like her. I listened patiently, but stood firm in my decision. I told her she had a month to either find a job or move out. I thought I was being fair, especially since she'd been living with me for 3 years with no rent and no clear plans to leave. The last week of the month came, and Carla hadn't made any effort to move out. In fact, she had barely done anything at all except complain about how hard it was to find a place to live that was affordable. I'd already been paying her rent for so long, and I had to start making decisions for myself. I told her it was time for her to leave. Carla, of course, got mad. She started shouting at me, saying I was being unreasonable, that I had no right to treat her like this after everything I had promised her. She said she had nowhere to go, and that I was a horrible brother for kicking her out when she was already struggling. I tried to stay calm and explain that it was time for her to take responsibility for herself, but she wasn't listening. In the end, I ended up asking her to leave. She refused and said she would call our parents to get them involved. I didn't want to escalate things, but I was also done. I told her that if she didn't leave, I would call a locksmith to change the locks, and she could figure it out from there. She left, but not without telling me that I had betrayed her and that I would regret it. I feel like I was just trying to do what was right. She's an adult now, and she needs to learn how to take care of herself. I know it sounds harsh, but I'm getting to the point where I can't keep carrying her forever. At the same time, I feel guilty because I don't want to hurt her, but I can't enable her behavior any longer. Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. You gave her 3 years of free rent and let her stay without contributing anything. It's your apartment, and it's your decision. You set clear boundaries, and she didn't respect them. She's an adult and needs to face the consequences of her actions. You didn't kick her out without warning. You gave her time to figure things out. You're not in the wrong. I understand wanting to help, but you've already done more than enough. She's an adult now and has had plenty of time to get her act together. It's not your responsibility to pay for her rent indefinitely. Hopefully, she'll learn something from this. It was time for her to grow up. No one is in the wrong. It sounds like both of you were just trying to do what you thought was best. You were generous for 3 years, and now you need her to take responsibility. On the other hand, she's struggling and felt abandoned. It's a tough situation, but sometimes families need to have tough conversations like this to move forward. Next up, I, 29 male, went to the post office the other day to mail a package. I'm a busy person, so I always try to get in and out of there as quickly as possible. On that particular day, the place was fairly quiet, with only a few people in line. There was a clerk behind the counter, and everything seemed normal. Then, this woman, who I'm guessing was in her 40s or 50s, walks in, looking around like she owns the place. She instantly notices the line of people waiting and starts loudly complaining about having to wait. She said something like, "This is ridiculous. Don't you know who I am?" She was acting like she was some VIP who should never have to wait for anything. At first, I thought she might just be in a rush or something. But no, it quickly became clear that she was just one of those entitled people who thinks the world should revolve around her. She stepped right up to the counter and demanded the clerk help her immediately, saying that she had important business to do. The clerk, who was doing her job and trying to help everyone in order, politely told the woman she'd have to wait her turn like everyone else. The woman was having none of it. She started raising her voice, saying that she couldn't waste time standing in line because she had business with the governor or something like that. She insisted that she was too important to wait for such trivial matters and that the clerk should prioritize her. The clerk, remaining professional, calmly told her again that there were people ahead of her and she would have to wait. That's when things started to get out of hand. I was the only other person in line at that point. I wasn't in a hurry, so I didn't mind waiting. But I could tell the situation was escalating, and honestly, I didn't want to see the clerk get yelled at. The woman was making such a scene, and I could see that she wasn't going to back down anytime soon. So I thought I'd step in and offer to let her go ahead of me. I told her, if you're in such a rush, I don't mind letting you go ahead of me. I don't mind waiting. Now, I thought this would calm the situation down. I wasn't looking for a fight or anything. I just didn't want to see the woman continue to make a scene. But as soon as I offered that, she turned on me like a snake. She accused me of trying to steal her spotlight. Apparently, by offering her to go ahead of me, I was somehow trying to take away her attention. She even said something like, "Don't think you can just push me around." At that point, I was getting pretty frustrated. I wasn't even doing anything to her. I was just trying to be polite. But she wasn't having any of it. She then started threatening me, saying that she would have me fired for trying to take over her spotlight and ruining her day. I was stunned. I've never been threatened with losing my job over something so stupid. She didn't know anything about me, yet she was ready to ruin my life because I tried to be polite. I wasn't about to let her get away with this, so I pulled out my phone. I turned on the camera, facing her, and said, "Go ahead, report me. You're not going to get me fired for simply offering you to go ahead in line. I'm not doing anything wrong here." That's when the woman lost it. She started shouting at me, saying I was ruining everything and that I would regret messing with her. But I kept recording her, showing how petty she was being in front of the clerk and the other customers. She was yelling about how she'd make sure I'd lose my job and that I should be grateful I even had one. Soon enough, a manager came out to see what was going on. The woman was still shouting, but now the situation was being handled. The manager asked the woman to calm down, but of course, she refused. She demanded that the clerk and I be fired immediately. The manager then informed her that she would have to leave, as her behavior was completely unacceptable. They told her she was being banned from using the post office for a month due to her outburst. She didn't take it well. The woman tried to argue, but it was no use. She was escorted out of the building. And you know what? As she left, the clerk and the other customers started clapping. I'm sure they were just relieved the situation was over, but I couldn't help but feel a little vindicated. I didn't want to escalate things, but I also wasn't going to let her walk all over me or the clerk. I did what I thought was right in the moment, but now I'm wondering if I overreacted. Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. You offered to let her go ahead of you out of kindness, and she responded by threatening your job and acting like a child. She was the one being unreasonable, and you handled it perfectly by recording her behavior. Good for you for standing your ground. Everyone sucks. Both of you acted terribly. She was rude and entitled, but you could have chosen a more mature way to deal with her rather than pulling out your phone. The situation would have been resolved without the added drama if you hadn't recorded her. But I guess I can understand why you did it. You're not in the wrong. She was completely out of line, and you did nothing wrong by recording her behavior. She was trying to make you lose your job for offering her a courtesy, and that's ridiculous. Honestly, good for the post office staff for banning her. She deserved it. Next up, I'm the customer service manager at a theme park, and I've worked here for a few years. Most of the time, things run smoothly, but every now and then I deal with situations that really test my patience. This is one of those cases, and I'm honestly wondering if I handled it the right way. It all started when a woman, who I'll call Karen, approached the entrance of one of our more popular rides. She had a child with her who appeared to be around 8 or 9 years old. The kid looked a bit younger than that, and I could tell something was off about the whole situation. We had clear signs posted for the ride that indicated certain height and age requirements for safety reasons. These rules are strict because the ride is intense and it's designed for certain physical abilities. When Karen and her child reached the front of the line, Karen immediately started complaining. She told the ride attendants that her child deserved this experience because they were a special angel who had been through so much. From the way she was speaking, I could tell she was very emotional, so I tried to stay calm and understanding, but I also had to follow the park's rules. The attendants told her that her child didn't meet the height or age requirement for the ride, which is when Karen got upset. She started demanding that we make an exception for her child. She insisted that her child was so brave and deserved to ride. I calmly explained to her that the height and age restrictions were there for safety reasons. I told her that no exceptions could be made, no matter the circumstances. I tried to be as polite as possible because I could see she was getting more upset. But it was clear that the rules had to be followed for the safety of everyone. Karen wasn't hearing it. She started yelling, calling me a heartless monster for refusing her request. She said her child had been through enough and should be allowed to enjoy the ride like any other kid. She started saying that the rules shouldn't apply to her family because they were special. At that point, I could tell this wasn't just about the ride. It was about her entitlement and her refusal to accept that sometimes there are rules that can't be bent. I stood my ground. I told her again that we couldn't make exceptions because it was a matter of safety. We couldn't allow her child on a ride that was too dangerous for them, and that was the bottom line. As much as I understood her desire to make her child happy, I couldn't compromise safety for the sake of her request. That's when the scene really escalated. Karen started yelling louder, attracting the attention of everyone around us. She was screaming that I was ruining her child's day and that we were a horrible park for not accommodating her special needs. I kept my composure and repeated that we couldn't make exceptions for anyone. It was about safety, and I had to enforce the rules. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get any worse, another guest, who had been standing behind Karen in the line, stepped up. I could tell from his tone that he was about to say something important. He looked at Karen and said, "I don't mean to interfere, but your child is perfectly fine. I've seen them running around all day and jumping on every ride. They don't seem to have any issues with their mobility." Karen froze. She started stammering, but the guest wasn't done. He continued, "You've been using your child's disability as an excuse to get your way all day. There's nothing wrong with your kid, and you're just manipulating the situation to get special treatment." The guest then turned to me and said, "I've seen her try to get special access to other attractions as well, using the same excuse about her child needing special accommodations." The truth hit Karen like a ton of bricks. Her face went red with embarrassment, and she looked around, trying to gather her thoughts. She was silent for a moment, but then she started muttering under her breath. She couldn't believe someone had called her out in front of everyone. I could see the frustration building in her, but I didn't want to engage with her anymore. Before I could say anything else, Karen stormed off, dragging her child behind her. She was still muttering insults under her breath as she walked away. The guest who had intervened turned to me and gave me a nod, acknowledging that he understood the situation. I thanked him for stepping in and pointed out that it wasn't easy for me to deal with these kinds of things, but I had to follow the rules. As Karen left, I noticed some other guests in the area clapping, which I thought was a little over the top, but I understood why they might have felt that way. The whole situation had turned pretty uncomfortable, and the whole park had witnessed Karen's entitled behavior. It was clear that she wasn't just upset about her child not being able to ride. She was upset because she couldn't manipulate the system to get what she wanted. I still wonder if I handled the situation the right way. I know I did my job by enforcing the park's rules, but part of me feels bad for her child, even though I now know that the child wasn't the issue. It wasn't the kid who was entitled, it was the mother. But at the same time, I didn't want to compromise safety for anyone, no matter the circumstances. Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. You were doing your job and following the park's rules. It's unfortunate that the mother was manipulative, but you made the right call. The rules are there for everyone's safety, and you can't make exceptions. She was just looking for special treatment, and the guest who stepped in was spot on. You're not in the wrong. You did your job, and the mother was in the wrong for trying to manipulate the situation. It's unfortunate, but rules are rules, and safety should always come first. The guest who called her out did everyone a favor, and it probably saved you from a much worse situation. Everyone sucks. The mother was entitled, but I don't think you should have let the situation escalate that far. Maybe there could have been a better way to approach her, rather than having a full-on confrontation. That said, it's clear she was in the wrong, and the guest who intervened was right to call her out.